Day 365. An entire year measured not in sunrises or seasons, but in the deafening, perpetual absence of sound. A year since the world ended not with a bang, but with a hush. I remember the screaming, of course. For 7 tidal hours, the world was a symphony of terror. Then silence, a silence so profound, so absolute. It became a predator in its own right. Because in the quiet that followed, they came, the reapers. We don't know what they are, where they came from. We only know their one, inviolable rule: to make a sound is to be unmade. They hunt by listening. The snap of a twig, a cough, a single sob, it's a dinner bell. They are blind, swift, and utterly merciless. My name is Elias, and for 365 days, my world has been the Grand City Library. Its thick stone walls have been my fortress. Its labyrinthine shelves my hiding place. The books themselves, with their silent words, have been my only companions for much of that time. Here, the rule is simple: walk on the balls of your feet, wear shoes wrapped in layers of felt and cloth, and never, ever speak. I am not alone anymore. There are 2 others, Ben and Maya. I found them, or rather, we found each other, in the cautious, terrified manner of this new world. Ben was a silhouette in the street, frozen in place for an hour before I risked a signal. Maya was a ghost, a child no older than 15, hiding in the library's sub-basement, having survived on forgotten vending machine snacks for weeks. Ben is the pragmatist, the rock. A former civil engineer, his face is a roadmap of worry lines. His hands calloused and capable. He sees the world in terms of stress points and load-bearing walls. He is our reality check. Maya is our ghost of hope. Her eyes, wide and haunted, still hold a flicker of the world that was. She lost everyone. We all did. But in her, the loss feels fresher, a wound that refuses to scar over. She is the reason we remember to be human, not just survivors. Your communication is a silent ballad of gestures, expressions, and the worn slate chalkboards we carry. We have a main one, a large board mounted in the library's main reading room, our sanctuary. It's covered in plans, warnings, and the simple, desperate need to connect. Water filter is failing. Rations low 3 days maybe. Saw a pack of 5 near the old courthouse. Today, on my anniversary of silence, the chalk writings are more dire than ever. Ben had just finished his inventory. He stood before the main board, his back to me, the piece of chalk in his hand squeaking ever so slightly against the slate. I flinched. We all did. He froze, his head cocked, listening to the silence. We all held our breath, our hearts a frantic, silent drum against our ribs. A minute passed. 2. Nothing. The sound had been too small, absorbed by the endless rows of paper and binding. He let out a breath he didn't know he was holding, and finished his message with slow, deliberate strokes. He turned, his expression grim, and pointed to the words, "Can net go diate, watiar tu purifi gelames, heavy 3 duais, mex, 3 days." After a year of meticulous rationing, of stretching every resource to its breaking point, the end of our sanctuary was finally in sight. We could try to catch rainwater, but the filter was essential. Without it, dysentery or cholera would kill us just as surely as the reapers. I picked up a piece of chalk, the dust soft against my fingers. I wrote beneath his words, "The university? The science labs." Ben shook his head, erasing my question with a swipe of his sleeve. He drew a crude map of our immediate area. He circled the library, then drew a long, winding path several blocks east. He tapped a square he labeled MedMart. It was one of those massive, Al-Anon pharmacy and grocery superstores. It had been one of the first places hit, a cacophony of panicked shoppers that would have been a feast for the reapers. It was a death trap. Too dangerous, I wrote. It's in the open. Too many sound traps. The glass. Ben's jaw tightened. He wiped the board clean again, his movements sharp, angry. The university is twice as far, Elias. We won't make it there and back without supplies. The MedMart has a pharmacy. Water purification tablets, antibiotics, high-calorie food, everything. It's the only real option. He looked from me to Maya, who was watching us, her arms wrapped around herself. It's the only chance we have. I looked at Maya. Her face was pale. She was thin, too thin. The last of the canned peaches, a pathetic luxury we'd been saving, was gone yesterday. She hadn't complained, but I saw the hollows in her cheeks, the slight tremor in her hands. Ben was right. His brutal logic was undeniable. Our safety was a slow death. The danger outside offered a sliver of a chance at life. I took a deep breath, the air thick with the smell of old paper and dust. I nodded once. I wrote on the board, "Tonight, we plan. Tomorrow, at first light, we go." The rest of the day was spent in meticulous, silent preparation. The plan became our scripture. Ben, with his engineer's mind, drew a detailed map of the route on the reading room floor with chalk. He marked every potential hazard he could remember from his scavenging runs months ago. A street littered with broken glass. A collapsed awning with loose metal sheets that rattled in the wind. A block where the buildings created a wind tunnel, a place he called the Whispering Passage. I contributed with knowledge from the library's archives. I pulled out old city blueprints and satellite maps, finding potential choke points and, more importantly, alternate routes. We identified a series of connected back alleys that would keep us off the main streets for at least half the journey. Maya, quiet and observant, had her own role. She prepared our gear. Our shoes were already padded, but she added another layer of soft leather, stitched on with dental floss. She wrapped the heads of our tools, a crowbar for Ben, a small hatchet for me, in thick scraps of wool blanket to prevent any accidental clanging. Everything that could jingle or click was either left behind or secured. Our backpacks were old canvas bags, their metal zippers replaced with leather ties. As dusk settled, casting long, distorted shadows through the grimy arched windows, we sat together for our last meal. Cold baked beans, 2 spoonfuls each, and a mouthful of stale water. The silence was different tonight. It wasn't the familiar, comforting quiet of our sanctuary. It was the taut, humming silence of a guitar string pulled too tight. Ben caught my eye and gestured to the board. He wrote a single question. "You ready for this, bookworm?" I offered a weak, tired smile. I wrote back, "I've read about braver things. Never thought I'd have to do one." He grunted. A flicker of something that might have been amusement in his eyes. He looked over at Maya, who was meticulously cleaning her small knife with a piece of cloth, her movements precise and focused. He added another line to the board. "We do this for her." I nodded, the weight of his words settling in my chest. We weren't just getting supplies. We were fighting for the sliver of a future she represented. Later, I lay on my cot of piled-up blankets in the history section, unable to sleep. The moonlight streamed through the window. illuminating the spines of 1,000 silent stories. A year, 365 days. I thought about the first day, the sheer animal panic, hiding in a supply closet as the world outside tore itself apart. The discovery that silence was the only shield. I had learned to move like a ghost, to anticipate the creak of a floorboard, to measure my own breathing. I had survived. But this, what we were about to do, was different. It wasn't surviving. It was living. It was taking a conscious, terrifying risk. I closed my eyes, the faces of my wife and daughter swimming in the darkness behind my lids. I had failed to save them. I would not fail Maya. I would not. The dawn broke gray and cold. We didn't need an alarm clock. Our internal tension had kept us on a razor's edge all night. We dressed in layers of dark clothing, checked our gear one last time, and gathered at the massive oak doors of the library's main entrance. The doors hadn't been opened in over 6 months. Ben, ever the practical one, had spent weeks lubricating the massive hinges with rendered animal fat from a squirrel he'd managed to trap. Now, he put his shoulder to the door and, with an agonizingly slow, controlled movement, pushed it open. There was no squeal, no groan, only the soft, nearly inaudible shush of wood against stone. The air that hit us was a shock. It was cold and damp, carrying the scent of wet concrete, decay, and a strange, metallic tang that was the constant perfume of the dead city. The silence out here was different, too. It wasn't the muffled, dusty silence of the library. It was a vast, empty silence, full of menace. Every distant rustle of leaves, every gust of wind, was a potential threat. We stepped out one by one, moving with a practiced, fluid grace born of a year of enforced quiet. Ben took the lead, his eyes scanning every shadow, every rooftop. Maya followed him, small and tense, her head on a constant swivel. I brought up the rear, my responsibility to watch our backs, to ensure the door was secured behind us without a sound. I gently pulled the heavy door closed, leaving just enough of a gap to wedge a small, cloth-wrapped piece of wood into the frame. It wouldn't stop anyone, but it would let us back in without a struggle. Hopefully. Our first challenge was the street directly in front of the library. Library Square. It was a wide, open space, littered with the skeletal remains of abandoned cars and wind-blown debris. Crossing it felt like walking across a minefield. We moved in a crouch, sticking close to the line of cars, using them as cover. The rubber soles of our padded shoes made no sound on the cracked pavement. The only noise was the frantic beat of my own heart and the whisper of the wind. A flock of pigeons, startled by our silent approach, suddenly exploded from the roof of a nearby building. The collective whoosh of their wings was like a gunshot in the stillness. We all dropped to the ground instantly, pressing ourselves flat behind a rusted-out bus. My body went rigid, every muscle coiled. I clamped my jaw shut to keep my teeth from chattering. This was it, the first test. We lay there, unmoving, for what felt like an eternity. I counted my own breaths. 1, 2, 3. The world held its breath with us. I strained my ears, listening for the telltale sign of their approach, a sound that wasn't a sound, more of a pressure change in the air. A low-frequency vibration you felt in your bones before you heard the scraping. Chittering chaos of their arrival. Nothing. After 5 minutes that stretched into an hour, Ben slowly lifted his head. He scanned the empty streets, the vacant windows of the surrounding buildings. He gave a slow, Deliberate hand signal, all clear. Move. We rose, our limbs stiff, and continued our slow, painstaking journey. We were ghosts in our own city, haunting the ruins of a life that was no longer ours. We communicated with a series of precise hand signals we had developed. A flat palm meant stop. A pointed finger indicated a potential danger. A rolling motion with the hand meant move on. We reached the back alleys I had identified on the map. The space was tight, claustrophobic. The brick walls on either side amplified every small sound. A rat skittered across our path, its tiny claws making a scratching noise that sent a fresh wave of adrenaline through me. We froze, waited, and moved on. The journey was a grueling exercise in tension and control. Every step was a calculation. Every breath was a risk. An hour into our journey, we came to Ben's whispering passage. It was worse than I had imagined. A narrow alley between two towering office buildings. It had become a graveyard for anything light enough for the wind to carry. Plastic bags were snagged on fire escapes, fluttering like trapped ghosts, and the sound dozens of old, decorative wind chimes hung from the balconies of abandoned apartments, their delicate pipes clinking together in the breeze, creating a constant, soft, random melody. It was the most beautiful and terrifying sound I had heard in a year. The reapers were drawn to sharp, sudden, unnatural sounds. The theory was that the constant soft, unnaturalish noise of the chimes might actually mask our presence, a form of audio camouflage. Or it could be a death trap, the chimes acting as an early warning system for any reapers already nested nearby. Ben held up a hand, stopping us. He pointed at the chimes, then drew a finger across his throat. Big risk. I pointed to the map chalked onto a small slate I carried. The alternate route would add at least 2 hours to our journey, taking us through the open-air market, a known reaper hunting ground. Maya, who had been silent and trailing behind, moved forward. She pointed to the chimes, then to her ears, and shook her head. Then she pointed to her feet and made a slow, deliberate stepping motion. She was saying the sound wasn't the problem. The source of the sound was. We just had to get through without touching any of them. Ben considered her, then nodded. He trusted her instincts. He went first. He moved with an almost preternatural awareness of his own body. His arms held tight to his sides, his path a weaving, intricate dance around the dangling chimes. He moved like water flowing around rocks. Maya went next, her small frame making it easier for her to slip through the gaps. She was graceful, her terror channeled into a focused, delicate precision. Then it was my turn. I took a deep breath and stepped into the alley. The gentle, random music was all around me. It was disorienting. My senses, so attuned to absolute silence, were overwhelmed. A gust of wind picked up, stronger this time, and the chimes sang a louder, more chaotic song. One of them, a long bamboo chime, swung wildly, directly into my path. I flattened myself against the cold, grimy brick wall, holding my breath. The smooth bamboo tubes brushed against the sleeve of my jacket, a touch as light as a spider's web. It made no sound. But my heart hammered against my ribs, a drumbeat of pure fear. I stayed frozen against the wall until the gust passed, then continued, one agonizingly slow step at a time, until I was through. We regrouped on the other side, leaning against a wall, our chests heaving in silent exhaustion. Ben clapped me on the shoulder, a firm, reassuring pressure. We had made it. We were halfway there. The next obstacle was the highway overpass. From our vantage point, we could see the long, silent stretch of road, a parking lot of the dead. Cars were everywhere. Some crashed. Some simply stopped in the middle of a lane, their doors agape. This was the most exposed part of our journey. "We'll go under," Ben signed, pointing to the dark, cavernous space beneath the overpass. It was a mess of concrete pillars and accumulated filth, but it offered cover. The descent into the gloom was treacherous. The ground was slick with some kind of stagnant slime, and littered with things we couldn't see in the dim light. We moved slowly, our hands out to brace ourselves against the massive concrete pillars. The air was cold and smelled of rot and damp earth. And that's when we saw it. A nest. It was nestled in the far corner, a grotesque sculpture of debris, shredded clothing, and something that looked horribly like bone, all held together by a thick, black, resinous substance. It was dormant. The reapers were hunters, not homesteaders. They would use these nests as temporary dens, places to rest between hunts. The fact that it was empty was a small miracle, but its presence meant they were close, very close. Ben signaled for us to back away slowly. But as I took a step backward, my foot came down on something that wasn't solid ground. There was a sickening, wet crunch, followed by a high-pitched squeal of pain. A rat. I had stepped on a rat. The sound was shockingly loud in the enclosed space. It echoed off the concrete pillars, a sharp, piercing cry of agony. And then silence, a heavy, predatory silence. Ben's eyes went wide. He grabbed Maya. Pulling her behind a pillar, his face a mask of pure terror. He frantically motioned for me to do the same. I scrambled behind the nearest pillar, my mind screaming. The sound. The sound. It was too loud. It was a beacon. The feeling started in the soles of my feet, a low, deep vibration. The ground itself was humming. Then came the change in air pressure, a feeling like my eardrums were being squeezed. From the direction of the city, from all around us, came the sound. A dry, scraping, chittering sound. The sound of dozens of hard, sharp limbs on pavement, moving fast. They were coming. I peered around the edge of the pillar. I could see them now. They were silhouetted against the gray light at the edge of the underpass. They were nightmares given form, roughly humanoid in shape, but impossibly thin, their limbs too long, bent at unnatural angles. They had no eyes, no faces to speak of, just a smooth expanse of pale skin where a face should be. Their heads swiveled, large, complex ears like a bat's twitching, triangulating, pinpointing the source of the rat's dying squeal. They swarmed the spot where I had stepped, a whirlwind of spindly limbs and sharp claws. They moved with a horrifying, jerky speed, like a film playing on fast forward. They tore at the ground, at the dead rat, at each other, in a frenzy of blind violence. There were at least 20 of them. We were trapped. To run would be to make a sound. To stay was to wait for them to find us. We were less than 30 feet away, hidden only by a concrete pillar. I could smell them now, a scent like ozone and rotting meat. Ben was thinking, his mind racing. I could see it in his eyes. He looked at me, then at Maya, who was shaking. Her eyes screwed shut, her hands pressed over her ears as if she could block out the horror. He then looked up at the underside of the highway. He pointed. A maintenance ladder. Rusted old, but it led up to a service hatch in the roadbed itself. It was our only way out, but it was on the other side of the pillar. we would be exposed for a few seconds, and the hatch would surely make noise. Ben held up 3 fingers. On 3, he mouthed silently. He would go first to test the ladder. Then Maya. Then me. It was a desperate, insane plan. He took a deep breath, and on his silent count, he darted from behind the pillar. His movements were a silent blur. The Reapers, still focused on the source of the sound, didn't seem to notice. He reached the ladder, his padded hands gripping the rusted rungs. He tested it with his weight. It held, but a flake of rust, no bigger than a fingernail, detached and fell to the ground. It landed with a sound no louder than a grain of sand dropping, a tiny tink. Every Reaper head snapped in his direction. The world exploded into motion. Ben scrambled up the ladder with a speed I didn't know he possessed. The Reapers were on him in an instant, a climbing, swarming mass of limbs. He kicked at them, a silent, desperate act of defiance. He was almost at the hatch. "Maya, go!" I wanted to scream, but the words were a lead weight in my throat. I grabbed her arm, pulling her from behind the pillar and pushing her toward a different pillar, further away from the chaos. She stumbled, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it had stolen her breath. Ben reached the hatch. He fumbled with the latch, a heavy iron ring. He pulled. It wouldn't budge, rusted shut. He was trapped. He looked down at the swarming creatures. Then he looked at us. In his eyes, I saw not fear, but a terrible, sudden clarity, a decision. He let go of the hatch. He took the crowbar from his belt, the wool wrapping muffling any sound. And then, with a final, determined look at Maya, he did the unthinkable. He roared. It was the first human voice I had heard in a year. It was a raw, primal, ragged sound of pure defiance, a sound filled with a year of frustration and fear and love. It was the most beautiful and horrific thing I had ever heard. The sound hammered through the underpass, a shockwave of noise. Every Reaper, without exception, abandoned the ladder and focused its entire being on the source. They fell upon him, a wave of chittering, screeching hunger. It was over in seconds. I didn't see it. I couldn't. I just heard the brief, wet, tearing sounds, and then the awful, crunching silence that followed. His roar had been a gift, a diversion, a key. "Run," I mouthed to Maya, my face wet with tears. I didn't know I was crying. I grabbed her hand, and we ran. We ran from the pillars, out from under the overpass, and into the gray, empty light of the street. We didn't look back. We just ran, our silent footfalls eating up the cracked pavement. Ben's sacrifice had bought us our lives. We had to make it count. The rest of the journey to the Med-Mart was a blur of grief and adrenaline. The world seemed muted, the colors washed out. Ben's face, his final, resolute expression, was burned into my mind. His roar echoed in the silence, a ghost of a sound that would never leave me. Maya was in shock. She moved like an automaton, her hand clutched in mine, her eyes vacant. I had to guide her, keep her moving, keep her safe. The responsibility was a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders. I was all she had left. We reached the Med-Mart an hour later. It was a massive, box-like building, its giant glass front shattered and gaping. The wind whistled through the broken panes, a low, mournful sound. The parking lot was a junkyard of shopping carts and abandoned cars. The silence here was different. It felt watchful, predatory. I pulled Maya behind a large delivery truck. We needed a new plan. The front entrance was a death trap of broken glass. I scanned the building's exterior. There. A service entrance on the side, a heavy metal door. It was probably locked, but it was our best bet. Getting to it required crossing another 20 yards of open pavement. We moved in a low crouch, my hand on Maya's back, guiding her. My grief had sharpened my senses, honed my fear into a razor-like focus. I saw every potential hazard, every loose piece of gravel, every shard of glass. The door was, as expected, locked, but it was an old lock set in a rusted frame. Ben's crowbar was gone with him, but I still had my hatchet. I carefully unwrapped the wool from its head. The plan was simple and terrible. I would have to break the lock. The sound would be immense. I looked at Maya. I held up the hatchet and pointed to the lock. Then I pointed to a nearby dumpster, its lid half open. I pantomimed for her to hide inside it, to cover her ears, and not to come out until I came for her. She shook her head, her eyes pleading. She didn't want to leave me. I gripped her shoulders, my expression firm. It was the only way. She finally, reluctantly nodded. I watched her slip into the dumpster, pulling the heavy plastic lid down. I was alone. I took a deep breath, the cold metal of the hatchet handle grounding me. This was for Ben. This was for Maya. I raised the hatchet. There was no room for hesitation. I brought the flat, hammer side of the head down on the lock with all the force I could muster. The sound was apocalyptic, a deafening siaresque that seemed to shake the very air. It was followed by the screech of tortured metal as the lock mechanism shattered. The sound echoed off the surrounding buildings, a series of sharp reports that advertised my position to anything within a mile. I didn't wait. I wrenched the door open. It groaned in protest, another loud, terrible sound, and scrambled inside, pulling it shut behind me. I was plunged into near-total darkness. The air was stale and thick with the smell of dust and spoiled food. I pressed my back against the cold metal of the door, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. I listened. I didn't have to wait long. The vibrations started almost immediately. Then the scraping. They were coming, and they were coming fast. I fumbled in my pack for my flashlight, a small, hand-cranked model. I gave it a few slow, careful turns, the soft whirring sound making me flinch. A weak beam cut through the darkness. I was in a stockroom. Shelves stretched up into the gloom, piled high with boxes. I had seconds. I had to find the pharmacy, get what we needed, and get back to Maya. My light swept across the room, finding a door at the far end. I ran, my padded feet slapping softly on the concrete floor. The door led into the main store. The sight was one of utter desolation. Aisles of toppled shelves, goods strewn everywhere. The weak, ambient light filtering through the high, grimy windows gave the place an eerie, cathedral-like feel. I could hear them now, just outside the service door, scratching, scraping, testing the metal. They knew I was in here. I navigated the maze of debris, my light flashing across signs. Canned goods, cereals, pharmacy. There, at the back of the store, a raised section with its own security gate. The gate was pulled down and locked. Of course it was. But it was a simple mesh, and a section near the bottom had been bent and pried open, leaving a gap just big enough for a person to crawl through. Someone had been here before. I squeezed through the gap, the metal bars cold against my back, and found myself in the pharmacy. It was a mess, but less so than the rest of the store. Vials and boxes littered the floor. but the shelves were mostly intact. I worked with frantic, desperate efficiency. My mission was seared into my brain. Water purification tablets. I found a whole box of them, shoving several smaller containers into my pack. Antibiotics. I swept whole shelves of amoxicillin, ciprofloxacin, and doxycycline into the bag. Painkillers, iodine, bandages. Then, I raided the shelves behind the counter, finding what I was really hoping for. High-calorie protein bars and nutritional shakes meant for hospital patients. Gold. My pack was full, heavy with the promise of survival. But the sounds from outside the pharmacy were getting louder. A loud, percussive thump. And another. They were trying to break down the stockroom door. I didn't have much time. I crawled back out of the pharmacy and froze. They weren't just at the back door anymore. A new sound. A soft, rhythmic tapping. It was coming from the front of the store. Tap, tap, tap. I crept down an aisle, peering through a gap in the shelves. One of them was at the shattered front entrance. It was probing the edge of a large, precariously balanced sheet of glass with one of its long, spindly limbs. It was testing it, learning. They were learning. The realization hit me with a force that was colder and sharper than any fear I had felt before. They weren't just mindless beasts. They were intelligent. They were trying to find a quieter way in. The thumping at the back door stopped, replaced by a new sound. A high-pitched, metallic screech. They were tearing the metal off its hinges. I was trapped between 2 points of entry. The stockroom door was about to give way, and the creature at the front was seconds from bringing down an avalanche of glass. There was no way back to the service door, no way back to Maya. My mind raced, fueled by panic. The blueprints, the library archives. I had spent a night studying the plans for this part of the city. The MedMart. It was built over an old section of the city's maintenance tunnels. There had to be an access point, the boiler room, a sub-basement. I scanned the walls, my light bouncing erratically. I found a sign. Staff only. It pointed to a door behind the customer service counter. It was my only chance. I ran for it, my heavy pack thumping against my back. The door was unlocked. I slipped through into a narrow hallway. A loud CRH from the stockroom told me the door had been breached. I could hear their chittering, scraping sounds echoing down the main store aisles. They were inside. The hallway ended in a steep flight of metal stairs leading down. I took them 2 at a time, my flashlight beam cutting a frantic path in the oppressive darkness. The air grew colder, damper. At the bottom was a heavy, industrial-looking door. A sign on it read, "Boiler room authorized personnel only." I threw the door open and entered a vast, cavernous space. The air was thick with the smell of rust and stagnant water. Huge, silent boilers and a labyrinth of pipes dominated the room. And there, in the center of the floor, was what I was looking for. A heavy caster and manhole cover. Access to the tunnels. My relief was short-lived. The cover was huge, and it would be impossibly heavy, and lifting it would make a sound. A loud, grating, metallic sound. I could hear them upstairs. They were spreading out, sweeping the store in a systematic, terrifying search pattern. The scrape of a claw on tile, the sound of a toppled shelf. They were getting closer. I put my flashlight down, its beam pointing at the ceiling, and knelt by the manhole cover. There were 2 small holes for a pry key, which I didn't have. I looked at my hatchet. The blade was thin enough, I wedged the tip into one of the holes and pulled. The cover didn't budge. I had to use it as a lever. I found a broken piece of pipe on the floor, shoved it under the hatchet's handle for support, and put my entire body weight into it. The cover moved, just a fraction, with a deep, groaning screech of metal on metal that vibrated through the floor and up my arms. I froze. Instantly, the random searching sounds from upstairs stopped. A new sound began, the rhythmic, determined scraping of dozens of limbs, all moving in one direction, towards the boiler room door, towards me. I had no choice. I gave another desperate heave. The cover scraped again, louder this time, as I managed to shift it halfway off the opening. A wave of cool, musty air, the breath of the tunnels, washed over my face. The boiler room door shuddered in its frame. Thump, thump, thump. They were here. I squeezed my body through the opening, my pack scraping against the rough concrete. I was halfway through when the boiler room door burst open. The beam of my flashlight, still on the floor, illuminated a flood of writhing, pale nightmares pouring into the room. I let go, dropping the last 10 feet into the tunnel below. I landed hard on a pile of dirt and gravel, pain shooting up my leg. I looked up. A reaper's head, featureless and pale, appeared in the opening, its complex ears twitching, trying to pinpoint me in the darkness. I scrambled backwards, crab-walking deeper into the tunnel as more of them crowded the opening. They wouldn't jump. It seemed they had a fear of uncertain drops, but they would find another way down. I got to my feet, my ankle screaming in protest, and ran. I ran blindly into the pitch-black darkness of the tunnel, guided only by the feel of the cold, slimy wall. Behind me, I could hear them, their chittering echoing through the boiler room, a sound of frustrated rage. The tunnel was a straight shot for what felt like miles. I limped, stumbled, and ran, fueled by pure terror. My mind was a vortex of pain and fear, with only one clear thought: Maya. She was still in that dumpster, alone, waiting for me. I had to get back to her. After what felt like an hour, I saw it. A faint glimmer of light ahead. A ladder leading up to another manhole. I prayed it would be near the MedMart. I climbed, my body shaking with exhaustion and pain. The cover above was lighter. I pushed. It gave way, scraping against pavement. I cautiously poked my head out. I was in an alleyway, and not 50 yards away. I could see it. The side of the MedMart, the dumpster. My relief was so profound it almost brought me to my knees. But the area was not clear. 2 Reapers were patrolling the street, their movements jerky and unnatural, their heads constantly swiveling. They were hunting. They were waiting. I couldn't risk opening the manhole cover all the way. I had to get to Maya, but how? I couldn't make a sound. And she was trapped in a metal box that would act like an amplifier for any noise she made getting out. I needed a distraction, a loud one, and it had to be far away. My eyes scanned the alley. It was filled with trash, debris, and at the far end, a wrecked car. An old, beat-up sedan, its front end crumpled against a brick wall. An idea, born of sheer desperation, formed in my mind. The car's gas tank might not be empty. And I had a box of waterproof matches in my pack, part of my survival kit. It was an insane risk. It would be the loudest noise I had ever made. A beacon that would draw every Reaper for miles, but it would draw them away from the dumpster, away from Maya. I slipped out of the manhole, silent as a shadow, and hugged the wall of the alley, my heart pounding a frantic, desperate rhythm. The two patrolling reapers were at the far end of the street, their attention focused on the front of the Medmart. I crept towards the car. I unscrewed the gas cap with agonizing slowness. I sniffed. The faint, sharp scent of old gasoline. There was still some in there. I took a spare rag from my pack, stuffed one end deep into the tank, and let the other hang out. A makeshift fuse. Now for the hard part, getting away. I looked back at the dumpster. I had to time this perfectly. I took out my matches. My hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to strike one. The small flare of light seemed impossibly bright in the gray gloom. I touched it to the rag. It caught fire instantly, a small, clean flame. I didn't wait to watch. I turned and ran, not away, but towards the dumpster, my sprained ankle a dull, throbbing agony. I poured every last ounce of my strength into that silent, desperate sprint. I was 10 feet from the dumpster when the car exploded. The sound was a physical blow, a concussive force that threw me to the ground. A massive WHOOMPH followed by a deafening roar as the air itself seemed to catch fire. The world turned orange and white. The shockwave rattled my bones, and for the first time in a year, my ears were filled with a sound so loud it was pure, physical pain. I scrambled to the dumpster, yanking on the lid. "Maya!" I screamed, my own voice raw and alien in my throat. The lid flew open and she looked out, her face streaked with tears and dirt, her eyes wide with terror from the explosion. I pulled her out, grabbing her hand. "Run!" I yelled, pulling her towards the open manhole. Behind us, the world was responding to the sound. From every street, every alley, every broken building they came. Dozens of them. A tide of pale, spindly nightmares, all swarming towards the burning car. They ignored us completely, their entire existence focused on the overwhelming noise. We scrambled down the ladder into the darkness of the tunnel, pulling the manhole cover back into place just as the first of the reapers ran past our hiding spot. The sound of the fire and the chittering horde above was muffled, but still terrifying. We were safe. We were alive. We had the supplies. We huddled together in the darkness of the tunnel, shaking, gasping for breath. I held Maya, and she cried. Silent, racking sobs that shook her entire body. I cried with her, the tears carving clean paths through the grime on my face. We cried for Ben. We cried for the world we had lost. And we cried with the sheer, gut-wrenching relief of being alive. The journey back through the tunnels was slow and painful. My ankle was badly swollen, and Maya had to help support me. We didn't speak. There was no need. The silence we returned to was different from the one we had left. It was heavier now, filled with the ghost of a roar, the echo of an explosion, and the weight of a sacrifice that had bought our future. When we finally emerged, hours later, into the blessed, dusty silence of the library, we were not the same people who had left. We were harder, sadder, and yet more determined. We unpacked the supplies on the large reading table. The purification tablets, the antibiotics, the food. Enough to last for months. A mountain of survival bought at an impossible price. Later that evening, I sat before the main chalkboard. Maya came and stood beside me. I picked up a piece of chalk. My hand trembled. I wrote, "Ben saved us." She took the chalk from my hand. Her own was steady. She wrote a single sentence beneath mine. "We have to make it mean something." I looked at her, at the fierce, unyielding light that had replaced the fear in her eyes. And I knew she was right. Surviving wasn't enough anymore. We had to live. We had to find others. We had to rebuild, even if it was just a life for two people in a silent, broken world. I opened my journal, the one where I had chronicled my 365 days of silence. The page for day 365 was blank. I picked up my pen. There was so much to write about Ben, about his courage, about the sound of a human voice and the fire of a righteous explosion. I looked at the next clean page, ready for a new entry. Day 366, today we began to live.